I think we have 70 people here. Do I have the go to start? All right, cool. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today for this webinar on fashion in China with Luxurynsight together with Heuritech. We're very happy to have you today, and we're going to go through a lot of data and insights on fashion in China together with both our technologies and approach. And afterwards, we'll have a session of Q&A, of course. So feel free to write down your questions, and we're going to tackle through them at the end of the webinar. Just to share why we decided to do this webinar today. Of course, the Chinese consumers and the Chinese market are becoming increasingly important in today's fashion and luxury world. But China is not only a big market, it's also a very different and challenging market. So we decided together with Tony and Heuritech team to share with you some of the data and insights we collect every day at Luxurynsight and Heuritech. And share with you some ideas and trends that we see upcoming on this very crucial market. So on Luxurynsight side today, I'm Jonathan. I'll be sharing with you some of these elements together with Manon, who is the head of our China business practice in Paris. Thank you, Manon. And
hello,
on
everyone.
Side, thank you for being with us. And on Heuritech side, Tony, I let you take the lead.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Tony, the CEO of Heuritech, and we'll have the conversation with Marion, Market Intelligence Lead, and
hello everyone.
And Xin, a fashion analyst, will share all the reports.
Hi everyone.
So, yes. So welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here today for the first webinar with Luxurynsight, a long-time partner. We met actually a few years ago with my friend Jonathan when I started Heuritech after my PhD in machine learning. And as Bob described it perfectly, Heuritech has turned social media into an artificial intelligence tool that predicts the development of trends. We actually collaborate with the biggest leaders worldwide in luxury, fashion, and sports industry with pro clients, as you can see with the logo below. So, for example, Adidas, Louis Vuitton, Dior, Jimmy Choo. With my team, we have developed a unique technology which analyzes millions of images on social media each day. The goal is to understand what consumers and influencers are wearing now and to forecast the future. So brands can better plan their assortment, make more sales, and less overstock. So next slide. Our product really is a platform available online which provides data-driven trend forecasting. Merchandising teams, product teams, design and marketing teams access it to get predictive analytics on market and trend dynamics, on consumer segmentation, as well as inspirational mood board to help build the collection. For example, you can see here that we predicted the return of tie and dye this year with a huge increase of 68% this fall versus last year. So to achieve this insight, on next slide, we have a unique technology combining the science of AI and fashion. Each day, we analyze 3 million pictures on social media to spot key trends worldwide with a 1-year forecast at a 90% precision rate. This methodology is in 3 steps. First, looking at what consumer and influencers are wearing, then applying our image recognition to detect fashion details, such as beige high boots, and finally, processing the data with our own forecasting algorithm, predicting what is coming next. And today we will deliver some key data and trends on China with Luxurynsight. But before that, Jonathan, would you like to introduce what your amazing company is doing? You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Tony. I wouldn't dare to talk at the same time with you. So thank you so much for being here today. At Luxurynsight, what we do basically is we bring data-driven solutions for the luxury industry. We've been developing softwares and data-driven strategies for 8 years now. Basically, our job is to decode data and transform it into actionable insights. So we have the specialty of being both a tech company and as well a luxury expert. And we deliver basically two things. On one side, data platforms, and on the other side, data-driven strategy for clients such as some of the logo that you could see below, some of the major players in the industry. Basically, sorry, yeah, here we are. So basically, in terms of platforms, what we do is we collect data from over 2,000 sources worldwide in order to provide market analysis as true as possible and as coherent as possible. In terms of Business Watch, we are monitoring all the news that appear on the market and all the new products coming in. Price monitoring, we monitor prices in real time and look at market differentials in order to find the best opportunities and ensure there is no market discrepancies when currency exchange rates move too quickly. Distribution, we have over 500,000 point of sale in our databases. So as well, we monitor store locations, pop-up, and so on and so forth. And based on these platforms that we develop for our clients, we plug unique data-driven strategies with our consultants, obviously, and the expert that we work with. One of these programs actually is specially dedicated to China, because we have China desk in Paris with a little over 10 people, headed by Manon with us today. And we have an office as well in Shanghai. So one of these programs is called China Coach. And the idea behind China Coach is to help the brands define the best strategy based on data-driven audit. So we audit basically distribution, positioning, marketing, and then we help the brands coordinate actions together with the China offices to the level of implementation and monitoring good implementation in China. So together with Heuritech, what we decided to share today is some elements from macro data that we collect on Luxurynsight's level, market insight, brand strategies, key success factors, elements on Chinese consumers, together with Heuritech's unique approach of social media insights and fashion trends in order to give you an approach that is both bottom up and top down to combine our data-driven approaches. Well, I think it's time to jump in. So basically what we will cover today, we will do three things. First, we will discuss together about the China apparel market. Then we will discuss about the fashion trends in China, thanks to Heuritech prediction. And finally, discuss on the differentiation of the Chinese market and open to Q&A. So looking at the China apparel market, the China apparel market today is becoming one of the strongest markets in the world. It's about to become the first market, as you can see here, representing almost 20% of the world apparel market. But not only the size is important, the growth rate is even more important. As you can see below, the growth rate of the market is 7 to 8%. Of course, this year will be a totally different story, even with COVID, China will certainly be the #1 growing market, apparel market in the world. This market actually evolved quite a lot over the past few years. The market began to get a little more sophisticated, I would say, starting back in 2003, where fashion media began to bring some education or new brands to the market. There was a strong acceleration in 2008 because of the crisis at that time and the fact that e-commerce and digital grew quite quickly. Then in 2017, the market became more and more competitive. because of several trends. One of them being the street culture and the sneaker trends that we saw obviously on the whole luxury market, but that actually was very strong in China, and that explain actually the emergence of this street culture within the luxury world, as well as this China wave, which is the importance of China-driven strategies from brand and the growing digitization of brands. What happened this year with COVID actually is rather an acceleration of these trends rather than a transformation. The digitization of Chinese society and Chinese Apple market is breathtaking and is only growing, as well as China's growing importance within the fashion and the luxury world, because it's the first market that had to go through COVID and the first one that re-emerged out of it, and the fastest growing market today. So in terms of market, again, it's a market that represents 80 to 100 billion euro, with before COVID a growth of 8 to 10% when we look at the premium. If we focus on the premium market, it's a market that is particularly interesting because the premium fashion market in China is driven by three kinds of actors. You have diffusion lines of luxury brands, like Red Valentino, for example, some accessible luxury brands like Coach, and designer brands like Comme des Garçons. All of these brands are fighting and building a very big premium fashion market. And actually, there's a fourth kind of player, which is the emerging domestic brands, also growing very quickly and even quicker this year with the COVID period. In terms of consumers, what we've been seeing for the past 10 years is a very quick, I would say, growth of the middle class and the upper middle class. As you see here from the left, in 2010, the population was rather concentrated in the, I would say, upper popular class, and there's a strong distribution of wealth and increasing wealth going through society. That brings us to some sort of premiumization of the market, and this premiumization of the market helps actually this accessible luxury trend emerging and spreading through the market. So looking a little more into consumer outlooks, what we can say in China today is that the market is still quite concentrated in top tier cities. That still means a lot because you have in China more than 110 cities with over 1 million inhabitants. 56% of the premium fashion consumers are men. So it's a market that is quite balanced, but still men have high importance in the market. Millennials and Gen Z, so younger consumers, represent almost 80% of the consumers. So it's a very young market. And these consumers actually are very knowledgeable, very savvy. And they can do cross-border shopping, which we will cover later. So they have this ability to buy almost anywhere in the world. There's a strong focus on authenticity, which helps the emergence of unique trends and unique brands. And we can say that these consumers are more and more experience-driven, fitness-driven, especially with this year, situation. And as far as younger consumers are concerned, we could say that the millennials still prefer rather classic brands, whereas Gen Z, the younger consumers, can go to street style and athleisure. We don't want to spend too much time going into consumer segmentation, but what we wanted to show here in terms of looking at luxury consumers is the particularity of Chinese actually consumers. They're looking for more creativity. Luxury consumers are sometimes in China more ready to go for extravagance or creativity. And there's some sort, especially in the COVID environment, there's some sort of polarization with Chinese consumers being more and more driven to flashy brands and brands that are able to help them express positions, whereas in the West, people are more, I would say, cautious or a rationalist. These trends is particularly true with younger consumers. If we have a look at young generations, as you can see on the bottom left, the millennials and Gen Z represent 30% of Chinese consumers. However, the 30% of consumers represent 80% of luxury consumption. So the luxury market is clearly driven by very young consumers. And one of the particularities of these young consumers is the fact that they're new to luxury. It means that, 50% of them only began to buy luxury last year. So the brands constantly need to renew their positioning, their image, and their activations in order to constantly be on top of brand awareness. Otherwise, they would be too old. Let me give the mic to our friends at Heuritech, maybe to share something.
Yeah. So those figures and insights that you just shared, Jonathan, they show why it became very strategic for fashion brands to enter the Chinese market. But when we entering the Chinese market, it actually means understanding very well the dynamics that are at play over there, and also the fundamental differences when it comes to fashion trends. And for this, data can become an ally, because data can reveal key insights about social media that we are not used to, such as Weibo in China, which is one of the biggest social media with more than 500 million users. And on the other hand, those insights, they can only be well interpreted if you know the key differences between China and Western countries, such as the influencer types. Because in China, for instance, you have a very different influencer ecosystem. It is widely dominated by celebrities, key opinion leader, or what they call Wanghong. And they all have a huge impact on what fashion is in China, and also on what is selling out. So just as an example, Mr. Bag that you can see on top here, he has a huge influence on fashion sales. Whenever he collaborates with big brands, the products from the collaboration, they immediately sell out in China to an extent that is unreachable for most Western influencers. And all those cultural differences, we do integrate them in the way we build our methodology, such as our panels at Heuritech, and of course, in the way we draw insights based on our analytics. So let's now move on to the core of the webinar, insights about macro and micro trends in China. I'll leave the room to Luxurynsight.
Thank you so much. So we were going to begin with fashion trends in China, and I'd like to let Manon share with you some of the key trends that we're seeing today in China.
Okay, hello. So here we are going to present 6 major macro trends right now in China: the amplifying nationalism, the street fashion boom, retail upgrade, fashion cross-digital, eco-fashion, and genderless. And then we are going to details of each. So for the amplifying nationalism, as the young consumers today, they are having a higher expectation and appreciation for domestic brands due to the increase in nationalism. And with more homegrown brands like Li-Ning, Claude stepping on the global stage, Made in China has been defined as a symbol of pride, cool, and cultural resonance. And also thanks to the enhanced product design and quality, together with consumers' rising patriotic vigor, Chinese domestic brands experience, here we can see under this chart here, Chinese domestic brands experience a 32.6 boost in the Q1, even under the shadow of the pandemic. And among the fashion sector remained the most popular one, taking over nearly 60% of the total online sales of domestic brands. And for the street boom, it has been observed that street fashion maintains a very strong momentum in China. On Tmall, which is like China's #1 branded e-commerce platform, streetwear growth was 60% higher than other fashion categories in 2018, with sneakers and hoodies as the most sought after items. And here we list some interesting streetwear brands we think it's interesting for you guys to discover. And then for the retail, actually fashion retail has entered a new era of blurring the boundary of shopping and entertainment, becoming more immersive and experimental. So here we list this example of the Japanese design studio Nanto, which has revitalized existing Shanghai Town Square shopping mall in Pudong, enhancing overall use and visibility and bringing a theoretical experience for shoppers. For fashion and cross-digital, actually, since 2016, fashion brands have been increasingly seeking cross-sector collaborations. Today, the trend is really tapping on the relying of local digital games. A very recent example is that Givenchy, they just collaborated with the virtual boys band, The Future, from the ultra-popular Chinese online game, The Glory of the King, for its Chinese Valentine's Day limited edition, and they took the cover of the Super Ed August edition. So we are seeing more and more virtual idols in China now. And the fifth, about eco-fashion. Actually, consumers today, they care more than ever about the environmental impact of their purchases, encouraging brands to have an eco-friendlier approach. And beyond that, brands' CSR initiatives during the COVID outbreak have been paid rising attention, which plays an even more crucial role in affecting consumers' purchasing decision. So as we can see under the chart below, according to Edelman, 82% of surveyed Chinese respondents recently started using a new brand due to the compassionate way the brand responded to the crisis, and this is the highest ratio among all countries. The last but not the least, so actually we can see the unisex apparels, they're seeing an upward trend with 1.5 times more search volume on Tmall compared with 2016. And in 2018, genderless fashion saw an astonishing 340% growth. Males are increasingly moving towards more delicate items, while females are emphasized more by masculine styles, especially streetwear and the t-shirt, and which leads to a very interesting phenomenon we call little fresh meat. So here we give you an example. This have been changing the Western brand's vision and their marketing adaptation for the past years, and is still in across all categories.
So, and now we'll see how those trends, those macro trends, they translate into product fashion trends. So today we picked a selection of color, prints, and fabric trends that showed interesting different behaviors between China, Europe, and the US. And we will give you exclusive data about our predictions for the next fall, winter, and spring collections. And for each trends we selected, Qing will bring a broader perspective by sharing with us some cultural explanation about what the trend embodies in China. So just a reminder before we start, as Tony explained, at Heuritech, we use our forecasting methodology to provide brands with some key insights about fashion trends. It's based on the visual recognition technology, on images on social media, Instagram, and Weibo in China. So we give an answer to questions such as, is the trend going to be more or less visible in the future? Which consumer segments among edgy, trendy, and mainstream panels will be wearing the trend the most? And of course, way more metrics and mood board images. So let's start with color trends, which will brighten our next winter collection. Okay, turquoise for next winter. So it's interesting to observe that when quantifying the forecasting visibility of the color trend on social media for next winter, it will behave differently depending on the geography according to our predictions. So turquoise will remain a safe bet in the US with a steady growth rate compared to last winter, while it will be a fashion bet in both Europe and China, experiencing double-digit growth in visibility, plus 25% in China versus last year, and a bit lower, but still, plus 16% in Europe. However, when it comes to consumer segmentation, we see that in all regions, the color will be popular amongst fashion-oriented consumer segments, both edgy and trendy, proving its fashionable status. So if we zoom on China here, what you can see is the evolution curve of turquoise visibilities on Weibo over the last 2 years. So here you see the evolution of posts featuring turquoise garments, and the dotted line here is our forecast. So what you can see is that after a big slowdown in 2019, the color trend is coming back. And highlighted in gray here is the forecast for next winter, and here last winter in order to compare. And you can see that there is an increase by 25%. And as I mentioned, in terms of consumer segmentation, the trend is mostly worn by edgy people, but also by mainstream people. What it means is that this color is very popular among the mass market, but its desirability is coming back among edgy people looking for bold statements. So now Qing will tell you a bit more about turquoise and what it means in China.
So turquoise represents one of the key colors in Chinese traditional culture. As we can see from this mood board, it appeared in Asian paintings, accessories, and porcelains. In the past, it was mostly associated with rare, exquisite, luxurious, and sometimes even mysterious senses. For example, in the religious cave paintings, we attached one of them in the bottom. We see that turquoise was used to render the imagined immortal realms. However, for winter 2020, turquoise will navigate between tradition and modernity in China, becoming a cool and contemporary color popular amongst the younger generation. So this tone conveys elegance and restraint. There is a coexistence of bold and calm. Young people love it because they agree with the cool and edgy side of this color, not necessarily the association with the past. So it shows how much tension this color has. And moreover, turquoise makes the skin appeal brighter compared to the other saturated colors, which is appealing to Chinese consumers, as we know that this is a very important beauty standard in Asian cultures.
Thank you, Qing. So now tie and dye. So tie and dye is the trend that we see everywhere on Instagram. The tie and dye trend has made a big comeback in 2020 on social media, especially during lockdown. It was actually part of the growing do-it-yourself vibe, which many people have been exploring to express their creativity. And in China on Weibo, we actually saw some fashion lovers and influencers adopting the trends with discussions such as how to better handle tie and dye, how to deal with the messy colors of tie and dye. But however, what you can see here is that the penetration of the trend in the Chinese market is much weaker compared to Western countries. And for fall 2020, which is now, the visibility of the tie and dye print on Instagram is strongly growing in Europe by 47%, bursting in the US by plus 90%, and actually spread among all consumer types from the most fashionable to mainstream ones. Whereas on Weibo, as you can see here, the visibility remains quite low and even decreasing compared to last fall by 12%. And you can also see here when you look at this curve that this trend is very seasonal in China and very strong in summer and in fall. In terms of segmentation, the low representativity among edgy and trendy people is also some kind of a signal that this trend didn't garner as much enthusiasm among Chinese fashionistas as for Western influencers.
So this notable quantitative difference reminds us of cultural difference. In the West, we know that behind tie and dye, there is the hippie culture, and there is a very strong connection here. The colorful tie and dye speaks for a lifestyle that advocates free spirit, caring, and promoting sustainable fashion, which many Western consumers are willing to embrace since the COVID-19 outbreak. But in China, jiaran, which is tie-dye in Chinese, has long been a typical traditional folk art, especially in the southwest part of China. We can see the picture here in the lower right corner. They are mainly in navy and white. For the tie and dye trend, the majority is still unavoidably associated with this type of traditional crafts work. So despite the adoption of this global trend from fashionable people, it is still a bit too loud, too many colors according to some people. And thus they are reluctant to put it on, even they know that it is something really big now.
And knowing this big cultural difference actually does really explain the data and the decreasing data in China. So now let's talk about leopards. As we all know, it was the big print trend of 2018 and 2019, and we are all wondering if this will last. At Heuritech, for spring 2021, we actually forecast a slight decrease in visibility for leopards in both Europe and the US. But what is very interesting is to note that in China, it will actually increase by 15% versus last spring. And it will be driven mostly by edgy and trendy consumers. And if you look at the evolution curve here on Weibo, you can see that the trend has been growing fast in 2018 and kept slowly growing since then, and it will keep being more and more visible in the coming months, as you can see here looking at the dotted line.
So since 2018, the revival of leopard prints on catwalks has been steadily growing, with countless different expressions of these animal prints, from MM6 coat tone leopard prints, Celine's spring-summer menswear, to the current content of many Japanese fashion magazines, men's and women's. Leopard prints remains a strong reflection of a unisex and street mood. The popularity of animal patterns stems from our admiration of the beauty of nature. When famous Chinese haute couture designer Guo Pei talked about her Savannah collection, she shared that the primitive vitality of African wild animals was a key source of inspiration. Brands such as Lanvin and Dior were pioneers, bringing leopards to its initial explosion, allowing it to become a major print in the following decades. And today, we are seeing leopard prints interpreted in new and imaginative ways to adapt to a wider range of consumer tastes. This evolution of leopard prints in China translates the shift in consumer taste towards more extravagance, gradually turning from the previous shy and cautious attitude to more relaxed and open to experimentation, since it was once perceived as too sexy and a bit vulgar by the Chinese consumers.
And now linen. So linen is one of the oldest fabrics, but still highly desirable globally. And it will actually experience for spring 2021 a growing visibility in all regions according to our predictive analytics. So plus 35% in US, plus 54% in Europe, and plus 32% in China. A notable difference between the three regions lies in the consumer segments who are mostly wearing linen. You can see that in Europe and in the US, the fashion-forward consumers, so edgy, they have shown and they will keep showing a growing interest in linen, whereas in China, it remains a more mainstream fabric, which doesn't really embody yet a fashion statement. And when you look at the curve here, you can see that in our prediction that linen will be rising in China. And Qing will explain why it's mostly worn by mainstream people.
Indeed, in the Eastern culture, linen is associated with low-key personality, preferred by consumers looking for elegant and qualitative materials, in opposition to more show-off or luxurious fabrics, such as silk with gold elements or sophisticated hand embroidery. In China, well-known brands such as Exception, a high-end clothing brand dedicated to inheriting Eastern culture and showing the independence of Chinese women, and also Icycle, one of the leading brands committed to eco-friendly materials and sustainable practice, and also JNBY, which is Jiangnan Buyi in Chinese. They own a very successful domestic market share and also overseas business. They were the first and still the only designer brand today be listed on HKEX. So in China, many successful local brands have long used the linen fabrics to convey modern yet qualitative oriental aesthetics. Overall, it is not a fabric that is far away from mainstream consumers. And in Europe and the US, linen benefits from a strong status as one of the most eco-responsible fabrics, which explains the growing demand for it globally.
Then corduroy for next winter 2020-2021. So the forecasts here are very interesting because they reveal completely different behaviors. In China, according to our predictions, corduroy fabric will experience a growth of plus 19% in the coming winter. And in Europe, where the fabric has a longer history and is very much linked to retro fashion, it is predicted to have a moderate downturn of minus 16%, while in the US, its visibility is predicted to decrease by 47% compared to last year's. Plus, we see a big difference when we look at the consumer segmentation. In both Europe and the US, mainstream people from the mass market are actually disengaging from this trend, while in China, it's way more popular mainstream fabric. So you can see when looking at the visibility curve of corduroy on Weibo, that it has been strongly growing since winter 2019, and it will keep growing next winter. So how can we explain this difference?
So these vintage fabrics evokes many Chinese, the 80s and the 90s. It was an era where many people lacked material wealth, but started their pursuit of fashion. At that time, durable textile like corduroy were extremely popular across the country. We attached here an interesting picture in the middle. It well illustrates the 90s in China. These are actually Gen Z influencers reinterpreting the 90s in China in their mind. The rising visibility of corduroy today gives us a hint on the demand for comfortability in China, on a preference for practical consumption in the Chinese market. However, from a design perspective, corduroy doesn't rely solely on our retro plot. It is able to achieve variable effects. It can be delicate and smooth as velvet, fluffy and thick as knit. It is also combining more and more with many other lightweight silhouettes. So corduroy, the corduroy heat has recently extended to sneaker design too. In terms of color, the joining of pastel and vibrant tones also make a clear distinction with its previous conservative and adult sense.
So to share with you some key elements that we are seeing from this first elements, the idea that we wanted to share together with our team and with Heuritech team was to show that our approach are somehow similar and complementary. We always base ourselves on market and consumer data and outlook. And from there, we are on our side, Luxurynsight side, having a look at macro business trends, trying to see what's going on in terms of brand, retail, distribution, and so on. And then going down to micro trends. And there's definitely some echo in what we are seeing through our prism. For example, looking at the amplifying nationalism that we stressed earlier, probably this turquoise trend is some sort of an echo or resonance of this nationalism, since the color is very well linked to Chinese culture and history. On the side of eco-fashion trend, we can also see that the strong growth of linen in China can probably be linked to this emerging, I would say, growth of eco-fashion consciousness. And as far as street fashion boom is concerned, which continues to grow, in China, this leopard trend somehow can also relate to these trends. So it's very important not only to look at data through one perspective, but try to understand really what the market is doing and heading. And in terms of market and how brands adapt to the market, what we wanted to share as a final, I would say, perspective is the fact that Western brands have a very strong identity, obviously. But then going to China, which is such a different market, there's basically two directions. One is to try to adapt to China because consumers can be a little bit different. The other is to try to stay as close and aligned as possible with the brand DNA and image. Here, if we look, for example, at Fendi, Fendi has somehow aligned image in China as it is with the global one, a very chic, some sort of distant and edgy brand. Whereas Vêtements, for example, has some sort of a decadent and rebellious image in the West, but in China, it's giving much more of an optimistic, trendy and elegant image to adapt to the market. So the question is not really to say, should we go for a global image or really adapt to local, but it's a mix of both. And clearly monitoring the data helps brands find where they can adapt to seize opportunity, but keeping in mind this global perspective, definitely. Now, looking at 2021, because everything we're doing here is to help you prepare for what's next, and we know how challenging the next few months will be, we wanted to share with Heuritech a few big trends on the market. The first one is the growing opportunities in mainland. As you know, China was last year 10% of the world luxury market, which was already important. But Chinese consumers were 35% of world luxury consumers. Because of the almost impossibility to travel now, a lot of the purchases they were doing abroad are repatriated to China, which explains a very strong growth of the Chinese mainland market. In Q2, for example, Tiffany grew by 90%. So there's a strong growth in the mainland market, and this is also fueled with new free trade zone, such as Hainan in the south of China, where there's the possibility for Chinese consumers to buy duty-free. Adapt to new behaviors, because consumers in China, actually just like here, are changing quickly. Online is growing, well-being consciousness is also growing, so brands have to adapt to these new behaviors. Understanding these consumers is very related to these new behaviors, obviously, especially with regards to Gen Z, younger consumer, and men consumers in China. Because these consumers are quite specific, changing very quickly, and expressing a very strong national pride, which brings brands to be very cautious with regards as how to leverage, I would say, their presence in China and play with Chinese culture to show their respect, but also be careful with what elements to play with. New retail, China is probably the market that is the most developed in terms of O2O, of digitization, online to offline, offline to online. And this use of new technologies in retail is something that brands have to be inspired from, but also use to leverage their growth in China. Stay connected and entertaining, obviously, because with the COVID period, people stayed home for quite some time. So because they were with their phones and with digital tools, it gave the opportunities to brands to connect in a way deeper way with consumers by spending more time together, basically. This explains a lot of collaborations with music or education, so that brands can create more connection and entertain consumers more. And finally, some sort of seize the zeitgeist, what things are going on, try to resonate with these young consumers. Of course, it's even more complicated and challenging for you today because it's harder to go to China. And that's why actually we believe, because the market is growing very quickly, there's an even stronger need to monitor what's going on in order to align what is being done by the Chinese office in adapting the brand, but also know from the headquarters where the market is heading in order to keep this coherence in growing the market. So these are only a few ideas we wanted to share. Thank you so much for listening. You will receive an email tomorrow with the YouTube video of what we shared today, as well as this report that you will be able to download. Here are the emails of the people that shared their ideas today. And most important moment now is for you to share with us your questions, if you have some. Thank you so much. So I think you have access to, a chat room or something like that, where you can share your questions with us if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, it means we were extremely clear or boring. So we have a question here. I feel like I'm a radio guest. 1 second. So is China a fast-paced market? Do trends change quickly, or it takes a normal downturn? And looking at fragrance. if I may share something. So of course, China is a very, very fast paced market. The market is growing way quicker than other markets and also changing way quicker. The trends that we see changing in other markets regularly take, 6 to 9 months to change, while in China, it's sometimes a matter of weeks. So if you look at fragrance, which was your question, the emergence of the fragrance market in China is something relatively new. We can date it back for a few years only, but the market today, the fragrance market, is 7 times smaller in China than in America, for example, but it's growing 7 times quicker. So I believe this answers your question of how quick the market is changing in China. Don't hesitate. So, yes.
And just to add something, actually, fragrance is this category. It's the least impacted category during the COVID, and now they're going through very fast recovery. So they're almost back to normal now in China.
All right. So seems like people are getting excited. Okay, I'll see what I can do. I will avoid some of the questions in order not to go to jail. So forecast to travel, that's quite a complicated N2 vaccine. Okay, so if I had the answer, believe me, I wouldn't be at this webinar today. I would be on other channels speaking to the world. What's sure is that Chinese are traveling and picking up on travel already very quickly, especially with national travel, because that's what they have access to. National travel is growing extremely quickly in China. So I believe Chinese are really pushing to travel. And with this question of shift luxury consumption back to trips overseas or domestic consumption here to stay, I believe the domestic consumption is here to stay. This is only an acceleration. Bain predicted before COVID that by 2025, Chinese would represent 48% of world luxury consumers, and the local market would represent 25% of the world luxury market. This is accelerating definitely, but the domestic consumption is here to stay. There's a strong willingness from the government to repatriate spending home, and there's a trend also by brands to align prices and so on. So definitely the investment in China made to, I would say, catch up with the mainland market are not investment for the short run, but investment for the future. Maybe a question for our friends at Heuritech, for Leonara. A question about which of the trends were presented is going to be dominant, and if trends present in China that are not present in Europe or the US. I don't know if you have some ideas coming to your mind about that.
So maybe about your first question, it's really hard to say because it's those are like very different trends. We mix colors and fabrics and prints, but of course some of them are going to have a bigger visibility. It's obvious. What we said is that tie and dye has quite a small visibility and a small magnitude in terms of volumes of posts. But for instance, if you look at turquoise, it's getting way bigger because it can be used on many different garments. So it's really hard to say which ones are going to be because you need to look at the whole types of trends. And maybe I think I'm sorry, I think it disappeared, but I think you were saying something about the fact that some trends are like we see trends emerging in China that are not emerging in Europe. So yes, this is basically what we try to show today is that you see that some trends have very different behavior. So of course it will exist in terms of product trends. You will see a bit, but sometimes they can only be niche in Europe, whereas they are growing in China. Or the other way around.
I see another question here about how much important are social media Red, which is Little Red Book, and TikTok in China. which is different in terms of content and social strategy compared to Weibo and WeChat. Maybe Manon, you can share some elements about Xiaohongshu and Douyin and TikTok in China and why there are differences from Weibo and WeChat. Your microphone is off, I think.
Okay. So I think for the differences between Weibo, WeChat, and the Little Red Book, right?
Yes.
I think actually all these three platforms, they have quite different ecosystem, and when brand they are trying to apply the strategy on these different social media channels, they need to really understand differences and what their target. So for example, WeChat, we call it more like closed circle, because brands, you will have your own official account, and people who follow you, it's your own private traffic, and it's more to communicate with your, I would say, already exist clientele. It's more for CRM, for clientele maintenance. And for Weibo, it's more to capture the brand awareness, to capture new followers, new potential consumers. And for Little Red Book, because it's user-generated content that seems to be more authentic to Chinese consumers. So today it's also important for brands to have a presence on this channel. And something very interesting, it's Little Red Book, they start to do something like Instagram, which means brand, they can have this social commerce on Little Red Book directly. So I will see we are seeing like more and more luxury brands such as Louis Vuitton. They did their first live streaming in collaboration with the Red. So I will say that for Little Red Book, there are way more potential to explore in the future.
We have a question here about the Hong Kong market for 2021. There are mixed signals on the Hong Kong market. Of course, we know the tension in Hong Kong was quite strong over the past month, and therefore a lot of mainland consumers didn't go to Hong Kong and try to either go to other places or stay back home for that matter. But what happened with the COVID, however, is that the local consumers in Hong Kong could not travel neither. So it's a particular situation now because the Hong Kong consumers have quite a lot of money, and because they cannot travel, I would say the local market is trying to take more care of these local consumers. And we see some, I would say, positive signals on the Hong Kong local market. Of course, it's not as powerful as it was when it was driven by Chinese tourists. You know, Hong Kong has 7 million inhabitants, and at the peak, it used to have almost 70 million Chinese tourists. So the market is evolving. It's evolving to a more local or hub market. I would tend to think something similar with Dubai, because now with the inability of people to travel that easily, people in Dubai are more turning to the local market. So these together brings us to new trends in international markets. And actually, we don't need to go, that far away. Even Paris is something similar. Now, stores are trying to take more care of local consumers because there's not so many tourists anymore. So predictions for Hong Kong are hard to do. However, there seems to be, positive trends from local consumers. Okay, see a question here about the subgroups. So Gen Z and millennials, do older Gen Z and younger Gen Z members behave differently? Of course, when we divide consumers by age and clusters, it's just for the sake of simplicity. People that are born one day apart are the same, even though they may be in different categories just based on the dates. Now, when you have a section of consumers with 10 or 15 years, people will behave very differently. So this is just for simplification purpose that we segment by generations. What I would be tempted to think for China is that it would make more sense to even subdivide Gen Z into more categories, not only related to age, but to age, to where they live, because people in lower tier cities don't behave the same way as in first tier cities. also to their exposure with international, because that brings to a lot of differences in terms of trends and brands. So definitely these segmentations are just a first way to jump in the Chinese society, but it's not enough. What I would add is that today or yesterday, let's say, younger consumers and Gen Z were very powerful, and probably these younger Chinese consumers drove some of the trends that we saw on the overall luxury market, such as street culture or the sneaker waves. Because basically we were heading to a second generation of single children. So some Chinese children would have both their parents also being single kids, which means that one child may have two parents and four grandparents. And that means basically that a kid being 18-year-old may have all the savings and resources of six people, his two parents and his four grandparents, only for him. So because of that particular time coincidence, I would say, or historic coincidence, there's a lot of money that was pouring into the pockets of these young consumers. They already had their apartments and car paid, and they could spend all their money in fashion or pleasure. In a few years, nevertheless, they will have to pay for the retirement of these six people. So I would be a little bit cautious with the overspending of younger generations in China. And I think this is something that brands have to be careful betting on, because consumers are changing and their priorities are changing also. And we can see that even more today with COVID.
So maybe we can take one last question, if there is the last one.
Tony, I let you choose it.
It's for Luxurynsight, anyways.
So
Jonathan, it's for you, so you can choose.
Yeah, we try to find that. I think it's
okay, no problem. So there's a question here that I find interesting, if I may. It's a question of how to use. So this is the last question. Will this recording be posted? Yes, it will. Okay, that was a plan. No. So I'll go to another question. Hang on a second. There was a question of this, the strategies, the marketing strategies toward the Chinese market. Keeping in mind, of course, that China will grow, Chinese marketing importance, sorry, will grow, and that, you know, brands should be careful in how to deploy their strategies with China, and at the same time keeping in mind global luxury market trends and consumers. This is one of the key questions for luxury brands, of course, because luxury brands are unique in a way that they need to have a global and coherent approach. The reason why luxury brands are so powerful is that they're able to bring some sort of universality. People from all around the world dream of the same brands because they convey more or less the same big messages. So when you adapt too much to local consumers, you can make more money in the short run, but you take a risk on your brand. All the challenge for brands today is not so much in changing, I would say, the speech and telling a different story to Chinese, but telling your story in a different language. It is adapting who you are with finding some echo in the local culture or local trends with things that are already in your DNA or in your strategy. So what's very important in monitoring data is to be able to understand better who you are and find, you know, ways to fine-tune your intuition to find this resonance, I would say, on the Chinese market, because Chinese consumers are quite savvy. So they are looking at your brands, they're already interested. And the more energy you will put in understanding these trends and what they desire, probably the more successful you will be.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Wish you all a very nice day and see you soon in China or Paris.